And I started as an the most junior account person on planet Earth. When I started, I was making the coffee, I was fetching the donuts, and it was just luck that at that time Sarah Moran, who was a CSO of J. Walter Thompson, sort of took me under her wing. And I've never looked back. That's how I stumbled into it, and I just found that I really fell in love with working with creativity and creative people of all kinds and all walks of life. And so I've been on agency side now, I hate to say, because I look like a giant Santa Claus in shape and color of beard, by 20-some years, almost 25 years.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long.
I'm just in good lighting right now, just in good lighting.
So for the juniors in the room, I know that I talked to a few people in the beginning, and they weren't really sure whether they want to go the creative route, the strategy route. In your own words, what does a strategist do? What do you spend your days doing?
That's a great question. So let me start by saying I actually think the job is really similar in some respects, because I think I work at making strategy more creative and creative more strategic. So I think my partners are creativity at large, and that can be from a business leader on an account to a traditional copywriter. So they really blends the two. But in my day, I mean, I'm really blessed. I'm very thankful for the time I get to spend at the agency and the time I get to spend with clients and my colleagues is I get to work across a variety of projects during the day, a variety of clients, and always trying to figure out a really interesting way, or hopefully interesting, fingers crossed, someone will tell me if it's not, way to solve problems. And we often talk about it as big, juicy human problems that brands can solve. And so I spend time literally figuring out with creatives of all kinds, my clients whom I adore, very smart, lovely people who help me think better, just as my colleagues do, in trying to figure out ways that in essence help business by helping people. And I draw on all sorts of talents and skills to help me do that as a planner. It's never a solo mission.
Definitely. For those that are getting started in the industry, you said that you started in accounts and kind of worked your way up.
Yeah.
Any tips on how to find mentors, how to get in? Is the industry open to hiring junior strategists?
Yeah, so I was just saying, as we met early tonight, I mean, thank God for Miami Ad School, because I think you guys play such a critical role in mentoring, in training, and helping elevate the level of talent. So I'm really thankful for that. When I meet people from the school in the agency, it's always a really, really interesting conversation. I think there's always a place for junior people who are starting out, because I tell you, when I started out in the same place everyone else starts out, with just wanting to try and do good work, wanting to try and get a job, wanting to try and help. And so I think there is a place. We often hire in our agency network interns as well, and I would say almost 100% of our interns have managed to transition into a full-time job. And they're incredible, incredible people who add a lot to the agency and a lot to my life. And I would just say, I love doing this, and I meet people, so feel free to call or email. Seriously, I meet people every week at the agency, because I remember when I first started, I got a letter. This is pre-digital, so this is how old I am. Can you imagine pre-digital? I got a stack of rejection letters that was seriously like that tall, because no one would give me a chance, because I had to have all these check marks of things. And I swore at that point when I got my first job that I would never do that to anyone else. Never do that. Because you meet a person, and sometimes there's a really interesting connection with that person, that you just genuinely react to them as a human being. And so I believe skills can be taught, but who you are as a human being can't. And so since that day I vowed to do that, and I've kept that promise. So I meet people every week, and then we bring people into the agency on an internship basis as well.
That's beautiful to hear from someone, especially at your position, that you still meet with people on a daily, weekly basis. Because in the end, creative or strategy, your job is to relate with people and connect with people.
Completely.
Right? So
yeah, absolutely.
when you are hiring interns or hiring junior strategists, are there certain prerequisites that you look for, certain personality traits that you think make great strategists and kind of set people apart?
That's a good question. Yeah, I tend to be a bit biased about that, I guess, is because I've made a lot of mistakes. a lot of mistakes in my life, personally, professionally, and so I'm getting better at learning from them as I get older. It's the only one advantage of getting older. You tend to get a little smarter if you're lucky. I look for people who are just passionate, that you can have a really good conversation, and when you engage with them in a conversation, that they'll look at you in your eyeball when you're talking to them. It's amazing how powerful that connection is, and how often you'll talk to someone and they won't talk to you and look at you and have a human connection with you. So I look at passion, I look at people who are very curious, who can talk about a variety of different things they're doing, things that they're interested in, that they're tenacious, that they never really give up. Because I think it's hard in the world to sell at times a really beautiful, great idea, because sometimes with ideas come that aren't normal and are different, sometimes the world's not very happy embracing different. So you have to be tenacious, going back and back and back and figuring out that if you believe in something, that you're going to keep going at it and going after it until you either die of exhaustion or if someone finally says, no, we're not ever buying that idea. So I look at that when I look to planners. I mean, some of my best planners that I've hired, I've met when they've come through Canada on a backpacking trip. And I just found them really interested, and they've gone on to have really amazing, amazing careers. They're just really passionate, interesting people.
On that point where you said that you're kind of battling the way things are done, that's why Times kind of stood out. We were at the One Club Creative Summit last week, and one of the talks was about how being strategic and being creative is actually completely against the way your brain works. Your brain wants to go the same routes as it has always done. It finds comfort in familiarity. So strategists and creatives are battling the way their brain is naturally meant to function.
Yeah.
Tangent on that.
I mean, I think that's where it's such an interesting observation when you say that, because when I think about it, I mean, that's where I've been a really, really fortunate person in my career. I mean, as much as I joke when I say to Judy with that little figurine, that is love. I mean, we've been referred to as sort of work husband and work wife within the Leo Burnett network, because we'd be sitting there at night at 10 or 11 at night together with a little lamp on, trying to figure things out. And I think, like in any relationship, I think that chemistry between a creative or a group of creatives and a planner, and by creativity, I mean it can be beyond just traditional creatives. A business leader can be equally as creative, a media person can, an illustrator can, is that chemistry, like a good relationship where you can look at each other and have really honest conversations. Or to your point, Judy would often say to me, I'd show her something that I thought was really good, and I'd get this head lean, and she'd be like, and I knew I'd have to start again. But I would sort of ask, like, what's the reaction? And she would make my work better. She would always make my work better, and that's why I say the chemistry is important, because I was blessed to work with her for so long. And likewise, I'd like to think, and that she thinks the same thing, that I've made her work better.
Definitely. On that note of great work, what is the most important element of strategy? What's a common mishap that you see in briefs and briefings?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I was just talking about this today. I think the common mishap in briefs for me is, I think sometimes people erroneously will use them as a place to show how much they know, versus distilling it and simplifying it down to what I need to know, right? And I think sometimes people are really, really super smart, like super 5,000 smart, but yet it creates complexity behind the meaning. So I find simplicity, I mean, that's another thing, Judy and I would battle over it, and I've learned this the hard way. So I say Judy made me a better planner. She's probably one of the more influential people in my life, is she would say a challenge. She'd go, you know what, here's your challenge. Give me one sentence in each part of the brief. And I was like, oh my God, one sentence? Like, how am I gonna? And she'd be like, if you can't explain it simply, then how am I going to figure out how to work with it creatively? And I've never forgotten that, and I respect that, because it forces me to think choicefully of every word, and it forces me to speak in a colloquial way like another human being would to another. So I get rid of the jargon of increased market share and share of voice by la 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 la, and creating an anthropomorphic connection to la. It's like, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you understand, right? But if you say to me, oh, people hate you, and I want you to make them love you for the following reasons, you're like, oh, I get that. And so I think that's the greatest mishap that can go awry in a brief. And I think sometimes in strategy is just confusing volume, and then what that leads to is a lack of logic, right? It's not like a knife through butter. It's like you go on this zigzag journey, and after a period of time, I'm like, my God, I can't even follow the crumbs anymore. And so I think it's just rigorous logic is really helpful.
So on that note of kind of volume and kind of the amount of information that strategists have to consume and dilute into what's meaningful, how has the role of data kind of transitioned your role?
I'm just talking about that today too. The ironic thing in this whole conversation for me, and again, if any of you feel I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong. I keep an open mind, is planning was originally founded as a discipline in the UK to take on the deluge of data that was at the time that the clients didn't have time to do because of their busy schedules, and researchers kept pumping out data, but no one was really taking that data and taking what I'm just going to call them dumb numbers and finding the intelligence within the numbers. So planning has always loved data, always worked with data, always been a fan of data. It's just that now I feel like I'm a kid at the candy store. I really do. I love it. I'm not afraid of it. I actually want more of it because it's going to make my creativity potentially more interesting, more truthful, more human, more accurate, more relevant. So rather than, it's going to help me move from an I think into an I know. And I'd sooner be in the I know and find interesting ways to solve problems through an I know and allow the creatives to add their magic to it and shape it in a way that is immeasurably more digestible that way by using data. So I love it. I say give me more.
I just want to throw in a note here. All of our questions were crowdsourced, and I promised the team that I would do this. So if you guys have any questions throughout, tangent along what we're saying, please just throw up your hand. I am keeping an eye. Go ahead.
Actually, one question just on that note.
Yeah.
So obviously you have to, like you said originally, interpret a lot of data that's maybe coming from the client directly and their market research. But overall, would you say then that the job is more driven on looking at the data and interpreting it and finding the insight within it, or you and your personality and being in tune more with like the human condition, consumer behavior, and kind of filling in the gap between the two?
That is such a great question, Thomas. It's both. It's really both because at times, like you can give a mass amount of numerical data to someone who's just not very good at figuring out, and no matter how good the data is, you're still going to get a bad answer, right? It's like if I give the data to a cat, I'm still going to get a bad answer out of that. If I give data to a really intelligent human being who's creative and figures out what it's really saying, because 1 + 1 doesn't necessarily equal 2, then I can find something interesting. But what I love about your question is sometimes I think we all think of data as just numbers, but human behavior is data writ large, right? Human data is living human beings. It's life. I'll often say, I like just to sit and take someone for a drink, a cocktail, a coffee, or often I'll just sit like in the museum and I'll observe human behavior. And that human behavior is data. You know, as an example, I was just in the grocery store recently, and there were two moms with young toddlers in front of me, and one mom she had organic everything, and could tell was very conscientious of health, etc. And the other mother behind her, I think she had kids, she probably worked, she like everyone else really harried, so not so much. And you watch the unspoken judgment that occurred between the two of them, which was an unspoken judgment of what you're feeding your child, was astounding. To watch that drama silently unfold in front of us, right? And I think as human beings, you watch that behavior, and all of us either at times consciously do it, or at times unconsciously do that as well. Do you know what I mean? Like behind every human being is a story. And that's what I find amazing when you talk to them or when you observe them. That's a whole other form of data. And when you smash those two together, then you can really arrive at some interesting truths. So I think it's a combination of both. I mean, I like to think of sometimes planning is sort of legally acceptable voyeurism, you know? It's like literally sitting down and just looking at people. And often I'll go by, you know, I'll ask someone, oh, can I buy you a Starbucks card? Because I'd like to talk to you about something. I let them know I'm from the agency, and I let them know what I do from a job, and none of it will show up in social media. And I'm always amazed and humbled by how articulate and interesting and fascinating people are when you sit and you talk to them about things that I don't understand and how much they teach me by just a simple conversation. And that's part of data. Yeah.
That's interesting, because one of the things that we ask our students to do on every orientation, I think they're tired of me saying it, I know Runda's tired of hearing it, is go out and do something you would never do. Go to like a ballet show, go to a monster truck rally, go to a theater show that you would never go see, just to get out of your bubble and relate with different types of people.
There's this great campaign, I don't know if you guys saw it, you just reminded me of it. There's this great campaign exactly about what you're talking about by Travelocity a few years ago, and it was called Travel Yourself Interesting. And it was about that. It was out of the UK, and it was talking about this voiceover of, oh, how is she talking to the cute men in the gym? Because she's only a once-a-weeker, right? And there's these hardcore people sitting on the side, and she's rubbing her nose up against these really good-looking, beefy gentlemen on that. And as the voiceover explains, it's because she'd been to New Zealand, and she was explaining how a traditional Maori greeting happens and occurs, and that's all about, I love that line, because that's exactly what you're speaking about. Travel yourself interesting.
Yeah.
Expose yourself to different things.
It's beautiful.
It just helps you keep your mind open and you think things. It forces you to say, I'm knowledgeable, but I'm ignorant at the same time. And I think as a planner, I said the day that I believe I know everything is the day I must quit. I must quit, because you can never know enough. You can never understand enough about the human condition and about how people react to things.
Yeah. So just one question in between, and then I'll get to both of you. On that note, we kind of saw how strategy has really been defining brand, not lately, but in the past decades as well. Why is strategy more important now than ever?
I think it's such a good, again, it's another really interesting question. It's funny, I'm going to try and explain it, because I was just trying to get my head straight around it in a different context over the past month. I think because there's a number of factors that are at play right now facing brands, right? You've got this massive thing called disintermediation, right? Where one of my partners was talking to me, and we were thinking about this, and it's an odd notion where at once I had to go find the car, a taxi. I had to go find the taxi. Now the car finds me. It's Uber and Lyft. So they've disintermediated a whole bunch of things. And now with Amazon just selling direct to consumer, why do I need the supermarket in some cases, and why do I need the store? So that's forcing change for a lot of brands. And then you've got the rise of these, I don't know what you want to call them, whether they're like omni brands that are in just about every facet of your life, right? Microsoft's got technology, got data, got information moving into different areas. Amazon is in almost every area. Cars are moving into technology. Technology is moving into cars. So the area you compete in is even becoming fuzzier. And I think strategy and creativity are really, I would say, the last bastions of competitive advantage now. Is as a brand, you know, do you have what we would talk about at Leo? Do you have a purpose? Have you articulated a reason why you exist in people's lives? Mm-hmm. Not what you make, because it's so hard to compete on the what you make, right? We all go to a store, we all go out on that street, and there's how many fashion brands sitting on Queen Street as I came by in my cab, and it's like they all sell, in the simplest form, the same shit, right? T-shirts, jeans, socks, shoes. So why, aside from style, why would I go or price to another? But if you stand for something greater than what you make, you can supersede the category and reposition the category, because you buy for different reasons, right? Like Apple's been a master at that, right? Of looking at creativity and self-expression and ergonomic design, not technology. So I think that's why it's so important, is the aspect of meaning, creating meaning and creating distinctiveness, not differentiation, because I think that's really difficult in any category to compete. But distinctiveness rolls in this element of strategic thinking and creativity.
Yeah.
And then how you bring that to life through design, through user experience, customer experience. I mean, advertising is but one small slice of the pie. And that's where I think a lot of brands are also, and many of my clients are starting to think about expanding that too in its totality in the brand. And that's why I think without strategy, you don't have a roadmap. You just create stuff and hope it sticks and hope it's different. But with strategy, you're making a fundamental choice to be different and how you're going to be different. And that's why I think it's so important.
Amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi.
So when you go through the data and you analyze it, hoping to find the best insight possible, and you're going through one version of the insight, the second, and so on, and trying to develop it. Basically, my question is, how do you know when to stop?
That's a good question, Ronaldo, a really good question. This is where I say strategy, for me, it's different for everyone, right? You sort of find your own flavor dial. For me, that's where I rely on good chemistry and good partners. Because sometimes it depends the way you're geared as an individual, right? If you, I can be sort of obsessive compulsive on things at times. I will freely admit that. I like to work because I love what I do. And there'll be times where I'll write out and then I just need a partner to say, actually, that's really interesting. Just stop. You don't need to do any more. That's really, really good. And then I think at times as you evolve along, sometimes I think strategy is really no different than cooking at times. It's like you kind of taste it and you're like, ugh, I think it needs more salt or more spice or more pepper. And then at some point you look at it and you go, you know what? I actually think that's pretty good as an opening bid. And then I think not unlike creatives, you just need to be brave to sort of put your baby out there and then have other people react to it, right? And then just focus on commenting on the work, not the person, right? And then if you're in a culture that does that, it's all about the work. It's not about the person who created it when you're trying to improve it. It's about how can we make it better. So I think that's helpful. You'll know intuitively when you arrive at something that you think is kind of cool and interesting, but others will help you. Like the product of an agency, if I look at the Always work, if I look at the work that came out of Madrid from Juan and his team, is not a product of a single person. It's a product of a community of interesting human beings, right? So you're never left alone to your own device to solve the problem like a super Avenger with superpowers. It's like you've got other super people with super skills around you to help you with that. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
How often do you come across data that might sort of go against what that might be counterintuitive?
Yeah. My God, that's such a good question. So today, and yesterday, actually today was a really busy day. I just did this. I thought I had this really good idea for one of our clients, and I was like, wow, what if we position it really differently than the category and talk about them fundamentally reinventing that the category they're in with this one initiative they've got. And then I got back a piece of research that told me my idea sucked. Is they did this derived and stated importance, and I was like, oh, mine's kind of at the bottom. It was completely contrary to what I thought might be good, so that's why I think about this notion of moving from I think to I know. So there's, again, where the data was really counterintuitive to what I read in the newspaper about this category, which is in the energy category, what I read about people's reaction, what the press was reporting. It's like, wow, I would have thought it was kind of close to center. At least I wasn't even on the radar screen.
How often does that happen?
Look at, you're looking for my weak spot now. I love it.
The ways in which things are sort of shifting, changing.
Yeah.
How often are you just sort of data leading you to something that's just right on the precipice of becoming, over the edge?
Such
or
a,
more mainstream.
yeah.
Not quite there.
It's such a good question again, right? I mean, so the first thing to your question I should have put in the first part too is, I think what's an essential quality, what you're talking to be a planner, is just be humble and open-minded. There's like me today. It's like I thought I had a really good idea yesterday and it turned out it sucked. It just wasn't even remotely correct. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm just gonna keep going. Thank God for that data. But what you're talking about is really interesting because Then you're talking about pieces of work, like you were just sharing up here, like the Colin Kaepernick work,
Yeah.
the Always work Judy was working on. You talk about those things that are at potential, potential tipping points, right? To use a Seth Godin term of moving from fringe sort of into mainstream. I think that's a bit of art and a bit of science by just being a culture vulture and reading a lot. I mean, I got to admit, some of the best planners that I've had the pleasure of working with that have taught me a lot were voracious readers. They read a lot and they consumed a lot, and especially now with so much content out, I think that's sometimes the way, just to spot things that you feel may be burbling. And then in the world of digital, you know what? Test and learn. I think that's the joy of it right now, is sometimes I think making no effort is the mistake. Trying and learning is never a mistake. So you could come up with a great idea and we'd be talking about it, and I'm like, I think it's pretty cool. Let's just launch it, because you know what? Facebook will tell you whether it's good, Twitter will tell you whether it's good, Instagram will tell you whether it's good, and YouTube will tell you whether it's good. Whether you've hit an interesting area to play in, and that's the joy. And if it isn't, then fine, then we'll figure out another way onto it.
If you could change something in the whole industry of the advertising, what's supposed to be?
Oh my God, these questions are tough tonight.
You've been asking that question all night tonight. It's a good one.
It's a really good one. I have a couple answers to that. I think one is, and I work at this every day, is how can I help clients, how can I help my colleagues to produce braver work, to produce more interesting work. And I understand that from my client's perspective when they have to go and justify an investment to their CEO and to their board of directors, the pressure they face. And so I think it's one thing I could change if I could. Now there's a lot of research now, thank God, from the IPA as an example, and their effectiveness report just recently coming out, talking about the effects of strategy on effectiveness and creativity in terms of effectiveness, which helps. So that's one thing I could wish I could change, but I think the burden is on me and agencies to help change that for our clients. Like when I look at work, and I'm sure we all do this, just go home tonight and watch TV, and how much of it, or go on YouTube, or just when you're on your iPad, how much stuff gets served up, and you're like, who cares? Right? That's what I want to get around. I don't want people to spend money, and my clients' money, on who cares work. And I don't want to create more pollution in the world. Even if it's digital pollution, it's still pollution. It's just going into a different ocean. And I want to work a way around that. And I think probably, you know what? That's my biggest thing I want to change. But I think I'm culpable for helping that change as it evolves.
I have a question on that note. So with the industry moving at hyper speeds, and we've heard so much talk about breaking down silos,
Yeah.
whether that's art, copy, design, strategy, how do you think about hybrid creatives and hybrid strategists in your agency? Are they able to kind of go out of the realms of what they do and have opinions and be able to affect different pieces of the work? How do you see the industry evolving in that aspect?
Wow, there's been lots of conversation. I'm sure you heard a lot of that at the One Show by people more acclaimed than I am to answer that question. So I think all the holding companies are trying to address that. I know, at Publicis Group, we have a very different way of working as a holding company called the Power of One, where we're bringing together different agency brands and different talents together to create super teams to help our clients.
Okay.
And it's working really, really effectively. I would say in Toronto, at Leo, we've got a different structure of working where, to that point, we're combining different talents and designers and planners and different types of creatives, whether they're digital natives, not digital natives, whether they're coders, not coders, and then into one working group, so they're in constant contact, like just sort of a big giant clump together because it forces ideation at the same time. So that's what I'm finding. I mean, it's interesting you ask about the planners. Some of the best planners they're very good as a generalist, but then like everyone, they have a deep passion about stuff. Because I grew up through the age of, again, I feel like I'm aging Santa Claus here, but I grew up through the age where people would ask me, oh, are you a digital planner? Oh, are you a creative planner? Are you a brand planner? Oh, are you a media planner? I'm just like, I don't know, I'm just a planner. I'm just a planner. And I think now the most successful planners that I have the pleasure of working with across every agency in our network are just good planners. Like they get digital, they get brand, they get research, they get brand strategy, they work with creatives, they understand how to put together a media ecosystem and bring in the right talent to make it better. Sort of that vertical expertise of bringing in my media partner, bringing in my creative partner, bringing in my digital partner who knows more about how to succeed on YouTube and Instagram than I do. But bring it in, but those planners are really well-rounded as strategists. And likewise, they can talk about marketing strategy and business strategy just as well.
Amazing.
So do strategists have to be a jack of all trades within strategy? Is that what you're saying?
No, yeah, sorry. If I gave you that impression, I apologize. No, because I have strategists who are really, really passionate about things I'll never be passionate about, right? So there are some people who are just passionate about, an example, about their own generation cohort, and they understand it better than I ever will because they're that generation. Like they're living it, I'm not. So I appreciate that. They've got this vertical passion and expertise. There are some people in our group who are just avid about film. And so they bring a whole other discipline of visual language to a brief or to decoding a competitive set and thinking about strategy visually that I don't. So each of us has a different passion. Mine tends to be passionate about brand purpose and human behavior. That's what I'm frenetic about and obsessed with. And so as a combination, we have a really thriving ecosystem, right? We've got air, water, land, soil, plants that flower, plants that don't flower, fruit, feed. But as alone, we'd expire. But together, we succeed. So no, you don't have to be a generalist, but as a planner at some point, you do have to know the basics of each. You have to know how to speak to research. You have to know how to write a qual guide. You have to know some basics, but do you need to be an expert? No. Almost think of it as, maybe an easier metaphor is think about it when you go to your family doctor. That's kind of the thing. You've got a good grounding, but he or she doesn't have to be the heart surgeon, right? They don't have to be the ophthalmologist, but they've got enough general knowledge and smarts to go, I actually think you need to go here, Brent.
Is that something that we should come into the job knowing already, or is that something we learn along the way?
No, I think if you're with a good agency and a good planning group, I go back to the starting point of the good question you asked, which I sit down and I look at you and I'm like, oh my God, I really love that conversation with you. You got to meet Tahir, who runs our planning group. You got to meet Lisa Greenberg, who's our CCO. I mean Natasha, who runs accounts. Like, really interesting person. I think they get a lot of value to the culture, which is so important because that product behind you is a product of people. And together, when you get good people together, amazing things happen. And then I'm like, then it's my responsibility or Tahir's responsibility, 50% of the way, I'll meet you 50% of the way to help you get where you want to get to. That's my job and my promise to you. I need to know what you want to, your ambitions are, and I need to help you get there. That's my job. It's what I'm paid to do, partially, and then with clients. But then you also need to meet me 50 way with that passion and that hunger as well to keep on moving to the next level. So no expectation of that. Yeah.
So a little bit on a tangent of that question, I kind of want to expand on it a bit because it's a great question. The last strategy event that we had, I kind of did a LinkedIn search of how many roles, how many job opportunities there are within strategy in the landscape, specifically in the GTA. And it turns out that as of about 2 weeks ago, there were 630 job opportunities all across media planning, brand planning, channel planning, communications planning, data. what tips do you have for those that are starting out of how to kind of differentiate what they're good at, what they're passionate about, where they can possibly start? Because it seems like this big world and they don't know where they fit.
I think what you have to figure, the one question I can't answer for any of you is, what are you passionate about? Because that's something that you need to sit and just think about. And sometimes I think, like when I think of myself, sometimes it takes trial and error to figure out what I am passionate about. Some things I'll try and I'm like, oh, I thought I would really like that, but I don't like that. It's kind of like eating out. Oh, I thought I would try, oh, I didn't like that shrimp. That was not good. Not passionate about that shrimp dish. So I think you have to sort of figure that out for yourself. And then if you know what you're passionate about, then go into a media planning job, then go into an agency planning job, then go to a client-side planning job, then go into a political communications planning job. And you know what? You've got your job. Fantastic. You've made it. You've achieved something. Try it. And if you find that it's not fueling your own energy at the end of the day, and you realize it's not fueling your own energy, you haven't made a mistake. The mistake is not realizing, or realizing it's not fueling your energy and staying with the job, right? Not making a mistake is saying, yeah, you know what? I thought it was my passion, but it's not. So now I'm going to try this arm of planning. I don't think that's, I mean, I've gone through a lot of different careers. And, you know, as I said, I'm passionate about music, but it doesn't pay the bills. But I found something that is equally creative and happens to pay the bills. And in between, I've done a lot of things that I thought were cool and weren't really cool. So, you know, that didn't, I used to work in a meat store trying to get money for university, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. And I'm like, you know what? That was not my passion. That was not a very fun job. I refused to serve liver. It was gross.
Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Toby. I have a quick question about data.
Yeah, Toby.
Do you find that data can't repeat creativity? For instance, the iPhone. I don't have any actual facts or figures,
Yeah.
but I feel like when the first iPhone came out with just the screen, I don't think anybody was asking for that. I don't know if there was any data that pointed to that, but just the little I know about Steve Jobs, it doesn't seem like someone who made decisions based off of data. There's this thing people say that Steve said the customer is always wrong, so I don't know if he ever said that, but there's that thing. So do you think data can actually impede you from doing something groundbreaking like the iPhone because data doesn't support this awesome data like you have? Like if it could, how can you like find a middle ground where it's perfect blend of data and creativity in the middle?
I love your question and I love your example, Toby. It's awesome. You remember I was talking about this notion of human data? I think there's, again, because for me there's data that's numerical data, and then there's data that I could get from all of you if I had the pleasure of taking each of you out for a coffee or a drink, whatever your poison is, and having you in the agency. I would learn something about you, which I could over a period of time, you might belie to me an intimate truth that says, you know, Brent, I really wish that someone would do X, or I really wish that my favorite brand would do Y. That's data. They may not have done it yet, because it doesn't come out of a survey where I've got 5 choices that I have to pick from, but it comes from a real human being, and now I'm determining an unmet need that you might have that I can create a product or a service around, or a brand around. And that's the way I start to think of data in that sense. So you're right. There are many things I think as human beings we don't realize that we need, but when we encounter them, we innately or intuitively grasp onto them because they fulfill a need that either we can't articulate very well because it's so emotional or so primeval or primordial, but it fulfills us in some way. So you know what, I equate it's back to a relationship again, right? For me, sometimes brands are no different than relationships, right? You'll meet a lot of different people in our lives, and I'm always amazed that somehow, at some point in our lives, if we're lucky, we manage to find some way, somehow, a person that we connect with, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I want to say it, and sometimes I think brands are that way too. They fulfill an innate need that you didn't know you had. But when you encounter that, for some reason, the attraction is so strong that it fulfills a need. So I'd say, yeah, human data is a big part of what we look at and do, because sometimes the numbers, again, won't tell you tell you anything, because sometimes you're only reacting to the now. What's available now, right? I mean, it's like the famous Ford quote about no one would ask, right, for a car because they were focusing on a faster buggy. I bastardized that quote, I realized, but it was the same thing. I mean, it's hard to project what I might need in the future, but I sure know I love Uber.
To feed off of that,
Yeah.
do you kind of have any control on how the data is mined when you get it? And when we're talking about human data, I feel like there's a lot of biases involved. For instance, before the election in states, Hillary, yes, and Trump, I'm sure if we asked Americans, would you like a president who caused division and heightened racial tension? Most people would say no. That's who they voted in. Well, like the two men in store, one was quietly judging the other. I'm pretty sure maybe if you asked her in private, like, did you judge her? She might say, oh, no, I didn't. I'm not a bad person. I don't know why she was buying that. But you saw it happen in real time. How do you, like, get data that, doesn't have those human flaws and, like, everybody now is talking about social justice. So if you ask everybody in this room, you will probably not say some of the things they actually do inside, just so they don't seem different from everybody else.
It's another great question. I think that's what's really hard to decipher now, especially because each culture has its own context about what's appropriate to discuss or talk about. And then you've got public conversations and public truths, and then within each of us we have private conversations and private truths, right? And so I think that is difficult to decipher now. So in your first part of your question, yeah, as a planner, you're often involved in helping to craft a discussion guide in qualitative research or a quantitative survey and research, because you may have in your mind, Toby, a theory or a hypothesis that you want to see is, to your earlier point, whether it's emerging on a tipping point, whether there's a little flame flickering on it, to see if there's truthiness to it, that you would be involved in crafting that. So you would definitely have a hand in doing that. And then you're right, there's all sorts of, I just saw this weird wacky chart like last year about just the number of human biases we have, behavioral biases, like it was crazy, the number that we all have. So that is difficult, that is at times difficult to navigate, and that's often again where I rely on people that are 100 times smarter than me, and I'll go talk to, an example, when we did the campaign for domestic violence against women. As a man, I would not emotionally, I rationally understand it, I shallowly emotionally understand it, right? Because I'm not the gender, right? And nor have I experienced it as the gender. So I went to two women who are experts, world-renowned experts, that happened to be in Toronto at the university so that they could educate me on that from the perspective of a woman and what that entails psychologically, physically, emotionally. And so that's when you're smart to reach out to people and understand all the things that go on that are maybe not talked about, that are thought of afterwards, that are at a slow boil, that I would have no idea about, nor frankly in that conversation really a right to even comment on, right? Because I don't understand it. But I was smart enough to reach out. So that's where you've got, that's why I say it's a product of all humans. You reach out to those people who are really experts in those fields, right? Sometimes, right, often when you sit and you think about, at times, if I have a question on a campaign, I'll always go talk to, if it's involving mothers, I go talk to a mother. I know it sounds really simple, but it's like, I gotta move from the I think to an I know, and I'm not gonna know the I know, because I'm not a mother. I've got nieces and nephews, so I'm an uncle, but I need to talk to the mother to help me to the I know part, or the I think part. So I go to the experts, people that are smarter than I am on those topics. And then try and assemble, but then I also go back and say, did I understand you right?
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, and Toby, you touched on it as well, but as the admissions director of Miami Ad School, I get the lovely opportunity of meeting with a bunch of students that are considering going into a career in advertising, whether it's creative or strategy, and they find that their values, they question their values. They don't want to add to an industry where it's traditionally been seen to increase kind of consumerism.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of those brand examples that we showed. They're they bring social justice. They kind of shift pop culture and social behavior
Yep.
into a more positive route. How have you battled your ethics with advertising, and what tips do you have for students that are getting in and they want to be aware of what they're doing to the world?
These are all tough questions. They're really good questions.
Honestly, that one comes
No,
up at least 3
I-
times a week.
I
at
love that.
least.
I love that question. So there are accounts in my life where I have said that I can't personally, ethically work on it because I feel that I can't do the best work for my client and I can't do the best work for my agency, so I'm putting both at risk. So I will say I can't do that, and if I'm of strong opinion, and it's a strong enough opinion, I make that decision in the full knowledge that some people may react favorably and some may not. But if I feel that passionately about it, I'm like, if it costs me my job, it costs me my job. Because I would sooner walk away whole in heart and soul than compromise what I believe in as a human being. Now that being said, that sounds onerously serious. It's not, because next to your part, I mean, and you guys push back and you tell me if I'm full of shit. I've got thick but youthful skin. Is, like, I look around this room, like, everything around us is advertising. Like, we can choose to admit that and think it's not advertising, but everything is advertising, right? Are you a copywriter? Hashtag copywriter. Advertising. Good, I get it, you communicated, I get it. So everything that we choose, right, again, the way you choose to dress, the style that you put on is advertising. The faces that you show me is advertising. If you've got your phone out, like this right now, and you're looking at this board, you're advertising to me. You're basically saying you're the most boring person on the earth and I don't give a shit about what you talk about and I know everything in the world. That's advertising. So the question is, yeah, what adds, your question is a really good, profound, philosophical question, because at the heart of it, I think what you're asking is what adds to the benefit of humanity and what detracts from the benefit of humanity. And I think the one thing, Judy and I used to talk about this all the time. We would have time in our day where we would just talk about philosophy and about certain precepts of Buddhist philosophy. I'm trying to be a good Buddhist, but I think that's a multi-lifespan endeavor.
Yeah.
Is never forgetting, and I've forgotten this a lot in my lifetime, is never forget that we all have the ability and the power of choice and of self-choice. And at times, we forget that we have the power to vote economically about what we will spend our money on and what we won't spend our money on. And we have the power to do that in our lives with people that add to our lives and detract from our lives. To associate with people that help the world become better, or to not associate, or to associate with people who make the world worse. And I think that, for me, it is at the heart of how I try to live. I am not successful at that every day. I am not successful at that every year. I'm as fallible as anything on the planet, anyone else, but I never forget the power of choice, to be able to make that decision as to will I buy a certain product if it aligns to my values or not. And the research would support that as well. An overwhelming majority of people tend to choose and consume from brands that reflect their same values. And so I think you never forget that choice. And it's the same, I think in advertising. Business has a profound ability to do good in the world, and many businesses are doing good in the world. And I think we all have a profound ability as individuals to contribute whatever portion or fraction of good we choose to contribute to the world as well. And at times that's just helping one person. But I think that's the way I view advertising. Is, again, I keep going back to sort of what we talk about incessantly of what helps people helps business in the advertising context. So if I'm helping people with some sense of utility or entertainment, then I'm doing something good. I'm either making someone like that spot from Madrid, you guys didn't cry as much as I did when I first saw it, so you're tougher than I am, is that adds to my life because it gets me to question how I choose to spend my time. So I laughed because the guys over there asking me, am I on Twitter? Nope. Am I on Facebook? Nope. Am I on Instagram? Nope. So you might go, oh my God, Fred Flintstone, like seriously, you're behind. But I'm exercising my power of choice because I've made the choice to live in real time and in the real world. I'm not saying that as a judgment at all. That's just good for me. That's just good for me. I'm not going to be a wealthy blogger, but that's okay. I've made that choice. And so I think just never forget that. Is I think if you're helping advertise things that add to people's lives, hamburgers can make you feel happy. They've made me feel happy lots of times. I just ate a bag of chips today. Thank you, Lay's. I loved it. It was really good. It made me happy. Starbucks makes me happy in the morning. When I have a crappy week, my Starbucks card goes up and up and up and up and up. But it's a happy part of my morning, and that makes me happy in some way.
Thank you. I get to add a couple more answers when students ask me that
Yeah.
again and again. I know one of the other answers that, who was, I think it was Angus Tucker from John Street
Yeah.
gave was, well, if you have problems with the way society works and the things that are said and the way people's behaviors are, get into advertising because you have the loudest platform in advertising. In no other career do you get the chance to put your words out to billions of people and they don't have the choice. They're going to see it whether they want to or not. So you can do good with it.
I also think, though, to add to that, right, I love advertising, don't get me wrong. I love what I do because I get to work with amazingly creative, interesting people and amazing, interesting clients every day. But I also think what's interesting in that comment is an individual can actually publish something on a platform now and fundamentally change the world. Do you remember the news coverage about Egypt and the bubbling insurgents going on? The population started to post those videos, do you remember, on YouTube? And it changed the dialogue and it changed how that country functioned, even for a brief period of time. And that was someone who wasn't in advertising, that's someone who had a phone. And I think you could, what's great about the present time is you can create an idea and put it out into the world that can fundamentally change someone's life or change many lives at that. And what I love about that now is that power is in the hands of not every human being, because obviously there are people who are far less fortunate than where I'm lucky I just happened to be born in the state that I was. But for the majority of people in a first world country, for sure, you have the power to change and express yourself that we've never had the power to do before. So you don't even have to be in advertising to do that.
That's true. Any questions from the crowd? Colin.
How do you help your clients write great reads for your agency?
Sorry, Colin. What?
How do you help your clients write great reads for your agency?
Yeah, that's another really good question, Colin. I think often at times it tends to be more of a conversation than it does necessarily a presentation. We spend a lot of time understanding, at least in the world of Leo Burnett, understanding sort of at first the big juicy human problem we need to solve. And that's sort of, I often think of it as the foundation or the liftoff pad for everything that follows, because we want to make sure that however creativity is used, that it's solving the right problem. Because often when I think, like you go into copy testing, an example, with creative work, and it just bombs or it doesn't do well, sometimes it's because the problem is ill-defined. We're actually solving a problem that doesn't exist for people, or it's been half defined, so we've kind of got it half right, but not fully right. So when we're talking with clients, I'm really curious always to understand the problems they need to solve and what the human problem is that we need to solve. And again, maybe I view it overly simplistically, but I often just say at times and share with my clients is, why don't people love you as much as you want them to love you? And then you get to that interesting level of conversation about what human problem we need to fix. Maybe we don't have a service that's right, or maybe we don't have a UX interface that's right, or maybe the pricing's gone askew, or the brand is perceived in a wrong or incorrect way because of mythology or misreporting bred through the internet. I don't know. So that's typically the way I start. I don't even worry about the rest of the brief. until I figure out that, because I could waste a lot of time trying to figure that out. The other thing that we do, and again, this was an invention of Judy's, was a sort of a creative expectations meeting where once I've got that problem, often we'll ask the clients to share creativity that they think equally solved a similar problem, and also that they have heart for, they're willing to do. Because what you're getting at is interesting, because when you say, okay, on a brief, often, right, you'll get sometimes a generic brief, and it's like, I want to be the tonality of happy, genuine, thoughtful, and funny. And you're like, well, funny to me is going to be different than funny to you. So I need to understand from the clients in their mind, how does their culture and their brand view funny, genuine, etc. So we'll look at work and try and understand what type of work we also need to deliver from a tonal perspective, a look and feel perspective as well. And I find that really helps before we engage a lot of people and partners spinning wheels. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, good.
What is your definition for creativity?
Wow, you have got the tough questions, you guys, tonight. You're back into another good philosophical question. I don't have a definition of creativity. I'm not trying to escape the really intelligent question. I just think creativity comes in many forms, in all of its forms, right? So I genuinely don't know how to define that, because the way you dress is creative. The chair you're sitting on, if it's an R.N. Jacobson knockoff, is a creative endeavor. The knapsack that you're wearing is creativity. I think maybe here's a provocative answer, and I may be totally wrong. Maybe the problem is that people are trying to define creativity, that they're trying to create a definition within a box, and in fact, creativity never lives in a box. Creativity is constantly in fluid motion. You know that picture I showed you? I love your question. You know that picture I showed you of art? And one of the funny things was you said to me, oh, are you religious?
Yeah, that was my guess.
Trying to be a good Buddhist, though, trying, very complicated, very cerebral, is when you look at that, that was creativity. That was created, I think it was a 15th century, maybe 16th century painting that I had seen in a museum in Amsterdam. Look at that, that's creativity. Is it creativity today? No, this is creativity today. It's just expressed in a different way. So I think maybe you've helped me come to, thank you, to a definition, which is, I think defining creativity is a mistake. The definition of creativity is that it's just fluid thinking and evolution of current forms, right? That a chair has been around with us for I don't know how long. I don't know what century the chair was invented in, but that is creativity in its evolution, right? As human beings, as we all evolve genetically, I suppose that's a form of some unknown genetic creativity as well. It's just that it's always, for me, thank you for that question. Now you're going to get me thinking all weekend about this. Well, I love you for it and I curse you for it at the same time. Because I do think it's constantly fluid. What's not creative is stasis, is sameness. And stasis meaning stopping at a certain point. The chair is good. I'm not going to change it because it's got 4 legs, a place for my ass and back. That is a chair. That is how I define the chair. That's not creative. The lack of evolution, the lack of questioning is not creative. So the opposite of it is potentially fluidity and evolution. I got a wink and a thumbs up, so I must,
We're going to start asking that question to every one of our speakers now. It's always going to turn into a philosophy discussion.
That's an awesome
Thank you.
question.
More or less on
Yeah.
the same note about creativity. So would you say that, coming back to the first thing that you said about classical music, would you say that classical music basically helped you in your career, just assuming maybe,
Yeah.
to be creative? Because I was, and the same happened to me, and but now I'm in marketing and tourism,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that helps me a lot, not only in terms of creativity, but also like strategizing even, prioritizing your plan, whatever, and I think that helped me a lot. So is it the case for you in your career?
Yeah, it taught me, it's such a lovely question. I will admit one of my life mistakes, and one of the things to this day I'm even quite embarrassed about, that I've maybe only told 2 or 3 people, but I'm happy to share with you is it didn't teach me creativity, but what it taught me was responsibility to other people. And what it taught me was that magic, that when it doesn't matter whether it's classical music or jazz or pop, is again a product of many people, not the one person. And I can remember going through a massive score of music, just happens to be Bach's St. Matthew Passion. It's 3 hours long, lovely. And so I went into rehearsal with the orchestra and I thought, oh, who can rehearse 3 hours with music? And wouldn't you know it, the one part that the conductor started with was the one part I hadn't practiced. And so everyone was there. It was 80-some plus people, and the singers were there. And it just happened to be a part for my chosen instrument, the flute, that was all flute. So I don't know why. That was stupidity. I don't know why I didn't practice it. And of course, I cacked it up. I made a horrible mistake. I couldn't do it. And the conductor just stopped. And then he said again, and I couldn't do it again. And so I'm really embarrassed in front of 80 of my colleagues right now. And then he just turned around and grabbed his hair and threw his baton at me. And he apologized to the whole orchestra on my behalf. And he said, next time, Mr. Nelsen will be prepared. And I have never felt so horrified. I feel awkward just talking about it now. Like, how stupid was I? Like, because I let down 80 other people by not doing my job at the time, right? I should have busted my ass and maybe thought it through a little more. So, and then I think when you sit there and you think of music, and it is if you're into classical music or you go, I'd encourage you just to buy the cheapest ticket and go, and you hear that sound, it is an overwhelming product of a variety of talents, not unlike the product of an agency. And it's the magic that's made by a combination of people that truly makes it a transcendent experience. So that's what it taught me. Most importantly, yeah.
Let's go back there. Yeah, you.
So you mentioned previously that you want to help your clients do braver work. What does that mean to you?
It's another good question. I think some categories over time create almost a code, if you will, for work for the category that has expected copy in it, expected visuals in it, a certain construct to it as an example behind it, and they tend to then become quite insular. They compare advertising against the same advertising in the category. Versus, if I was sitting in a category right now, it could be anything. It could be food, it could be alcohol as an example. I would look at the Colin Kaepernick spot or an Always spot or your New York Times spot and say, that is the level of creativity that by definition of public response, the world loves, the world consumes, the world shows some sense of enthusiasm or respect for by definition of how it's passed along and consumed, and go, how can we do that and why aren't we doing that in the category of alcohol? Because sometimes I think the comparison becomes inward looking, right? And that's wrong, because then you just keep condensing and condensing and condensing and trying to outbest the next competitor at times when the worldview is really, 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 really small, when the worldview should be quite large. And so that's what I mean by braver work. I don't mean to infer taking greater risks at all. We're putting at jeopardy, annoying someone, insulting someone, putting money at risk, putting a brand at risk, and being irresponsible or disrespectful at all. I mean, finding, back to your interesting point, finding a different way onto something that may not have been done before, so that when people look at it, that I'm showing some sense of respect and value for their time. I think, Leo Burnett once said that the worst thing you can do in advertising is be invisible. And I think there's a lot of invisible right now. A lot.
Okay. I think we have time for 2 more questions. 1 more question. Let's go over here. Anna?
Yes. So I talk a lot about understanding human behavior and talking to the mom, talking to the consumer. So what are some of the questions that would help you get those insights really
It's a really good question. I think it's really dependent on sitting down, and like if you and if I had the pleasure of sitting down with you and you came to Leo Burnett and we started talking, it would happen organically, or I may want to know if you're coming in and you said, oh, I really want to be a planner at Leo Burnett. I would have questions I would like to know from you, like, why did you choose Leo Burnett? You're super talented, you're super smart, you've got 5,000 choices, why Leo Burnett? So I'm starting to try and get at insights I want to know and understand and guide the conversation. So typically I'll enter a conversation with big questions that I want in my mind to understand something I don't. And I think that's often, the conversation is never random when I go talk to someone over a coffee about something that I need them to educate me on. My questions are quite choiceful, and they will help me become better through their expertise and understanding. So I just sit down and I really try and think through my questions really, really well to try and solve the questions and the problems that I'm trying to solve in my mind. Does that help? Yeah, and it's specific, right? Depending on who you're talking to, depending on what category you're working in, depending on what you're trying to decode at the moment and figure out, the questions are really, really, really different. Yeah.
Copywriter.
Yeah, what would you say is something that you have noticed yourself do every day? Like for an example, like Stephen King, he would say that to perfect his own craft, he would get up every morning and write 8 hours, like that principle of 10,000 hours to perfect your craft. Seeing advertising as a craft, what would you say that you notice yourself doing every day of the week?
You guys have such great questions. Okay, other than having a coffee every day, you remember that cappuccino? Pre-cappuccino, Brent, not good. Post-cappuccino, Brent, mildly. I read every day. I bet I probably read a book a month. For sure a book a month. For sure a book a month. Easy. I read every day about something. There's this great crazy thing that Penguin did. So they got their editors to choose what they thought were the best examples of human literature, pan-cultural, across time, and they published it in these little mini booklets. So some of them are a whole book, some of them are a chapter, some of them are an excerpt. And so I bought it. I think there's like 89 of them and everything, so I read all of them just this past year. And that's what I do every day because it helps me learn about new and different things. It exposes me to different styles of writing. So if I'm trying to sit down with the creative team, I think of different ways to combine words on the best of my days. So that's what I do. I read every day. Don't get me wrong, I love my Netflix. I love my Netflix. But I just read every day because I think there's so much to learn within a book, because it also, by definition of the form factor that it's in, you're not being told what to imagine, right? They're giving you hints and prompts of what to imagine by the scenario, by how the character is cast, etc. But in essence, you're your own cinematographer. You're creating the imagery, you're creating the pacing of the dialogue, you're even creating the voice and tonality of the character, and the degree to which the interaction between two characters happens. That is far more intellectual than you might believe in training you as a planner than sitting down and being force-fed content that someone's told you how to feel, right? It's a different spin on it, right? It's put you in control. I'm trying to think how to bring those ideas, an idea to life in your way. In essence, you truly are then, beyond a copywriter, you are a holistic creative person when you read a book. It's just like I'm giving you the brief, which is the book. Now you're bringing that book to life, which is creativity. I find that really helpful, and the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting are rabid consumers of reading. Their wealth of things to pull on is amazing. They just pull these little strings out of the air, and they're like, oh, well, there's an interesting quote on this, there's an interesting book on this, I just read an interesting article on that, you know? And same about consuming film or advertising. You know, Mark Tutzel, our global chief creative officer and chairman, is retiring this year, which bums me out. He's one of my creative partners. His ability to pull on the history of advertising is astounding. Astounding. You go, yeah, there's that spot that was done in UK by blah, blah, blah in 1982, and blah, blah, what if we twist it this way? Like just creating a library within yourself of databases to pull on is really, really helpful. Think of yourself as a beautiful, lovely, thinking, feeling, almost like database that has the capacity far beyond just technology to pull on interesting things. And the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, right? The less you put into it, the less you're going to get out of it.
What's one book that you would recommend that everyone in this room read?
There was this really, there's this really crazy book by Mark Halperin, who's an American author, called A Winter's Tale, that takes place in New York. This sounds really Shirley MacLaine-ish, so do not buy it just because it sounds corny. But it's about this character that unwittingly sort of moves through time in an interesting way, but only in the city of New York, and the relationships that form over a period of time. Now, the other one I just read, I've got one of my planners, Anna, is reading it right now. This is not for everyone, for sure. I had time between client meetings, and so I just walked into an Amazon bookstore when I was in San Francisco. I picked up this book. Excuse me. It was written by a young woman who had to get a job to support herself through college, couldn't find her ideal job. So she went to work at a crematorium, of all things. I know, look, you're like, oh my God, it's horrible. But what was interesting about the book is, as you go through the book, and it's got a very dark sense of humor, so I say it's not for everyone, right? Because it deals with the topic of your own mortality, right? And how culturally we all view death, or how you view death personally, but it's got a dark sense of humor to it. But as you read through it, it really makes you think. It really makes you think about how different cultures tend to react to that, whether it's complete sorrow and destruction, or whether it's celebration, right? Or whether, as a Buddhist, you believe in the impermanence of all, right? And it's a natural part of the grand recycling scheme in Earth. So it's a fascinating read, just from someone else's different perspective of having to deal with that, like, as your job. And when you think about it, it's like, who the hell does that job? Like, who the hell grows up and says, I want to be in a crematorium? So it's I know, it's squeamish. It's an interesting read. But that Penguin set, seriously, just go find it, track it down, buy it. It's awesome. And they also just did another one, too, on modern literature, so contemporary literature. It's just really good to read. I've actually been exposed to books and authors that I would have never known existed, ever, that I've gone and I've looked up their works, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get that, I'm going to get that, I'm going to get that.
Thank you. I'm sure some of us will look into it. I'm definitely very curious. One more question. Yep.
So you said you work for work, not for clients or your agency, and you are trying to make it good work.
Mhm.
So what is, or where is your bar of excellence, and what makes a good work? And so I am a person who is going to start my career soon in Canada. Is like everyone in my generation, we are scared of failing. Have you failed or experienced a failure in a work that you were believing in it, that it was good?
Yeah, so let me start with the last question and work my way back. Have I failed? 5,000 different times. Do I fail every day? Yep, I do. Yep, I do. Do I inadvertently make a mistake every day? Yep, I do. But it's not a mistake if I realize it's a mistake, or someone helps me understand it's a mistake and I make it better. Then the mistake is erased from the timeline, right? So I think everyone is, I think everyone is afraid of failure. I think it's a human condition, but within that human condition is beauty. Because if you're afraid of failure, it means you're compelled to want to do something great, and want to do something additive to people's lives, and want to please another human being. That's, for me, where fear of failure comes from. So I think the motivation is good. I just think you have to, I shouldn't say you have to, I've come to accept that failure is part of trial, right? I can't fail if I don't try anything. That's the easy way out. Don't try anything, don't try anything. I'll never fail because I never did anything as a human being, right? I'm trying to learn how to paint right now. Disaster. It's like I've got a stitched on arm. You have this picture in your head and I'm like, what the hell is my arm doing? That doesn't, and after 2 hours I'm like, how did it end up the same color on the whole canvas? I thought I was doing trees and what the hell? I failed, but you know what? I'm going to practice and figure it out. So I think in the verse of your question, yeah, don't worry about the failure part. Just you'll find your own niche and your own, as we talked about, your own flavor dial. Is just dive in with both feet. As I told you, I got a pile of rejection letters when I first started. Yes. Did I have a few glasses of wine? Yes, I did. Was I angry? Yes, I was. Might I have cried? Yes, I did. It's frustrating. But I think, yeah, I said, come to me and talk at Leo, and let's figure out what you want to do, right? And some way, somehow, through everyone's connections, you're going to get to the right person. And maybe I can help you with that.
Thank you, Brent, for your time tonight. I think everyone is very appreciative of you sharing your opinions, your values, your beliefs, but also the way the discussion kind of transformed into philosophy and everything bigger than strategy, bigger than advertising. Speaking on behalf of myself, I would love to go out for a drink with you someday and just talk about religion and politics and everything else, and I'm sure everyone else would as well. But thank you for being here tonight. Thank you to the crowd as well. Thank you for posting and sending us the questions that you wanted to hear earlier on when you were signing up for the event. Thank you for being a great, attentive audience. Thank you for asking amazing questions. That really helped move the discussion along to a great place. Now I think the team has selected a Twitter winner. So thank you for participating on that end as well. It is at AJ_Plum, Allison Lee. Okay. So thank you for sharing your insights on Twitter. Hopefully we'll see you in the next couple of months, whether it's a creative class, strategy, UX, design, whatever you're interested in. Hopefully you can explore it with us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your questions. They're awesome. I'm not going to stop thinking now. So thank you very much.